All right, here we go. Yo, Shortbox Nation, welcome back. Thanks for being here. If you're new, welcome to the show. My name is Badr, and this is the Shortbox Podcast, the comic book talk show that brings you the best conversations about comic books with the people that put their blood, sweat, and tears into making them. This is episode 431. Today, I'm joined by one of the hardest working comic book creators in the industry. His name is Tony Fleecs, and he's an Eisner Harvey Award nominated writer and artist who is currently writing not one, two, nor three, but four, count them, four ongoing series right now, including Feral and Local Man for Image Comics, Uncanny Valley on Boom Studios, and he's a writer for Army of Darkness Forever on Dynamite Entertainment. He's also an insanely talented artist. You've probably seen his art on some of your favorite titles like Star Wars Adventures, Avengers, Batman, TMNT, Transformers, and just a literal, I'm talking literal, ton of My Little Pony comics. He literally is half man, half amazing. Tony also has a bunch of critically acclaimed creator-owned work to his name, including an autobiographical, I was blubbering that up, but it's called In My Lifetime. It came out in 2006. He's also got the graphic novel Jeff Steinberg, Champion of Earth, and you can't forget about his excellent 2021 Image comic series Stray Dogs with artist Trish Forstner. Tony's on the show today to talk about his current projects, work-life balance, and whatever else we get into. I got a feeling that this will be a good conversation. So, without further ado, Shortbox Nation, let's welcome Tony Fleecs to the show. Tony, how you doing, man?
That was great.
Yeah, we did. I appreciate that. Thank you. Dude, my first question, first and foremost, is how do you do it all, man? How do you balance so many projects? And this is coming from a project manager that's been working project management for years. I was going through the list of books you had, and when Amy Ranello from Dynamite reached out that, hey, do you want to talk to the writer that's doing Army of Darkness? I was like, sure, who is it? She's like, Tony Fleecs. I'm like, wait, you mean Fleece? I'm like, wait, you mean the guy that's doing Local Man that just launched Feral, is also doing Uncanny Valley? She's like, yeah, he's also doing He's been doing Army of Darkness for like a year. I'm like, what? Dude, how do you do it, man? How do you stay organized? Do you have any, I guess, like programs, any like systems in place to keep you like organized?
I can tell I'm doing too much because the last several podcasts I've done, the first question is how do you keep all this straight? And I don't have a real good answer for it. Basically, what happened was, I feel like a lot of freelancers, I live in constant terror of going broke, right? And so you just say yes to everything. And for the longest time, that's been what I've been doing. And the things that I've been saying yes to after Stray Dogs was successful, like it was, the things that I would get offered became bigger and better deals. Like you could do this whole book, or you could do this. Where it used to just be like, hey, can you draw this issue of something? Which is like a 1 month commitment. But now I've said yes to all these things, and I don't I don't really have a good plan for keeping track of them, or keeping them straight. All I really do is just I'm single. I live, by myself. I just only do this, and I sort of have like I have like a spot in mind where things are getting a little simpler. Like Army of Darkness will wrap up at a certain point. Uncanny Valley is only 12 issues long, so that'll wrap up at a certain point. So it's just a matter of like getting to those points. But in the meantime, I am just constantly working. Like I went to the movies last night. About every week or every other week, I go see a movie, and then the rest of the time is just cramming all this stuff in. Local Man, I draw it as well as if I was just writing. I feel like this would be a way different conversation because you can write, easily a comic or two in a week. But drawing is a whole different situation. I have to, it takes me at least 3 weeks, and that's moving pretty fast to draw a Local Man. I've done it in less. I'm doing it in less right now because we got a little bit behind. But yeah, it's just a lot of constant cranking and a lot of working.
Now, do you have like a preference when it comes to either writing or drawing? I read an interview where you were saying that when it comes to just being the writer on a series, that I'm obviously terribly paraphrasing, but you said something to the effect that you can't help but like your artist brain will sometimes activate where you're looking at these sketches or these thumbnails or these pages, and you're like, let me see if they'll try it this way. I think it might look this way. Like, do you have a preference when it comes to either writing or drawing?
Uh, yeah. Well, I mean, ideally, I would do all of it. Like,
Hmm.
but there's just like um, there's no lane for that for me just now. Like there's no that that opportunity has not presented itself yet. Um, but you're right. Like when I write stuff for other artists, I'm writing it as a writer artist, and so sometimes it is tough for me to let go of like the visual that I have in my head when I see it
Hmm.
when I write it, and so I am probably overbearing with artists.
Yeah.
But I think they also like I work with only people that I know pretty well, and we sort of respect
So
each
they
other.
understand you. Yeah.
Yeah, so if I don't know you, like if it's just like I'm doing this thing that's not announced at Marvel, and I'm working with an artist that I don't know, and so it's like we'll talk in email, but I'm not going to go like maybe do this with the like that's
Hmm.
that's a different situation. But if it's a friend and it's a
Gotcha.
thing that we own together and we both sort of have like equity in, I think it's a little bit easier for both of us. I'm sure they would prefer I just keep my mouth shut, but it's not a huge deal when I go. I'm trying to
Yeah.
like, you know,
Yeah. So you said something just now that piqued my interest. You said, you've got this like fear, this shadow over you about like going broke, losing these opportunities, and I've been listening to this Wayne Brady interview on the on the Questlove podcast, which I highly recommend. The Questlove Supreme podcast is fantastic. He interviews a lot of like musicians, entertainers, etc. But he's got Wayne Brady on the show this week. And when Brady said something about like, I think Quest had asked him like, hey, when does all your best ideas come to you? And Wayne Brady was like, oh, while I'm sleeping, like literally while I'm sleeping, the dread and anxiety of like, oh shit, like, I've got to come up with a good idea to keep my family, like housed, keep the roof above my head, pay groceries. So I found it interesting that someone at his level, right, someone that's like well respected that you would think is like maybe I thought he was like retired or something, but he's still out here like grinding and doing the work. And so hearing you say that, it's like I know that there are times when I go to like where I just take a break. Like I went to Philly this past weekend, for a music festival, and I had to fight back like that guilt of like, yo, I should be working. I should be lining up the
mhm.
next interview. Like, do you have any tips, or how do you go about like just being in the moment and not letting like tomorrow's task and next week's deadlines get to you?
Butter, you are asking the wrong guy. I have no idea, no idea how to do that.
All right, so we're
It
both
just
still
gets
working
to
on
me.
that. Got it.
Yeah, it gets to me. But
Yeah.
like, I think the issue is that I'm I think a lot about setting goals and like moving goals once you've achieved something, like,
Hmm.
all right, we did that. Now we're going to do this, like we got this thing working. Now let's see if we can get this other part working. And I sort of think about it like a progression, like we're headed towards something, life's a journey or whatever. And you just keep getting closer and closer to the thing you want to do. But the problem with that is that I'll also like the challenges that I set up for myself become more difficult to you don't make things easier on myself. Like I
Hmm.
take on things that
Same.
are bigger, or like I bought a house, and so then it's like, all right, well, the small amount of money I used to have to raise to pay rent with, now I
Hmm.
have to raise like several times that much to keep this mortgage paid. And so,
Yeah.
wow, instead of doing where I had just been working for other people, I work for My Little Pony or work for, now I work basically for myself 75% of the time.
Hmm.
Um, and so it is, like I don't know if it feels like I'm making the right moves, but none of them are uh, feel like secure, they
Hmm.
all feel
Hmm.
like they could all fall
Nah,
apart.
I respect it. Yeah, I guess I always thought. I guess for me it's really amplified because I'm a first generation American. Like my mom is from born in Morocco. I was born in Morocco as well, but I'm the first one here. Like all that pressure that comes from being like a immigrant kid and just relative like general brown guy guilt. Like all the stresses that come with that. So interesting to hear your perspective on that. But from an outsider looking in, I guess I'll lead with my question first, but like, how are you feeling about your career today? Because from an outsider looking in, it's like, man, 2021, yeah, Stray Dogs comes out, and I remember that being a moment. Like I can vividly recall the text that I got in several of my comic, friend thread text threads. Yo, you got to check this Stray Dogs out. I will admit, I missed the boat on it last night. I caught up with like the first three issues, and I'm like, yo, why do I always wait forever? But now you look, then you look like where you're at now, and it's like, yo, you're writing four ongoing titles, which I'm sure one of them is, if not all of them, have all kind of received like a lot of acclaim. You're getting press, and I guess I'm curious to hear, a long-winded way of just asking, like, how do you feel about your career, and do you still feel like you have a chip on your shoulder? I read that in an interview as well, where you were talking about after the My Little Pony stint that you did, that you kind of had a chip on your shoulder, that you wanted to prove that you were more than just a little My Pony guy, and thus Stray Dogs came out and all that. So I guess, how are you feeling about your career now? Like, do you ever just take time to smell the flowers and celebrate the victory, or is it still like, all right, next project, next project?
But Badr, I wish I had all the opposite answer for every question that you've asked me. Because it really is like I'm just like, well, I'm busy. I don't take this. I don't smell the flowers. I don't appreciate things when they're happening. No, I feel good about my career, of course. You know, I'm in a super fortunate position. Things have worked out. I couldn't imagine a better.
Hmm.
I couldn't imagine things of going better. It sort of has worked out exactly how I would have liked it to work out. There were times where it seemed like I was talking about, like you sort of move the goalpost, right? And
Yeah.
uh, like when I was just working steadily drawing, My Little Pony comics, I was like, I can't believe I make a living as a comic book artist. Like I can't believe
Hmm.
like a good living too. Like, I did better than a lot of my friends just by just sort of like sheer hustle and having that job on that book that was popular and that they made a ton of them. So they always needed somebody to draw that. Um,
I guess,
and
do you
then
mind really quick?
yeah, go ahead.
I'm sorry. Go. No, go ahead.
No, but like going from there to then my first image book being Stray Dogs, and like you said, it was definitely a thing. It was a
Yeah, a
moment.
hit, a huge
Um,
hit.
a big yeah, we sold 1 million across all platforms. We sold over 1 million Stray Dogs. You know,
Wow.
my
Wow.
first,
Dude,
like my first.
congrats. Wow.
Thanks, man. My first like solo writer book, my
Huh.
first image comic book, sort of just like could not have gone better. And so now being back with the follow up to that with Farrell and Local Man gets nominated for an Eisner, and it's like, of course, I feel great about it. But also, it's all sort of wrapped up in the part where I'm just also always constantly
Hmm.
busy making it. So I haven't really left myself a lot of space to like sit back and feel good about it. I'm just sort of like having to feel good about it while I'm working.
So when you go to comic conventions, I guess, like, what type of books are people asking you to sign? Are you still getting like a lot of like My Little Pony, or are you starting to see like the Local Man people, the fans of Stray Dogs, and all of that? I guess I'm just curious about, like, what is the readership of those
Yeah.
My Little Pony books like? Like, as an outsider looking in, I see them all the time, but in my head it's like, oh, these are for the all ages books. Parents are grabbing these for little kids, but it sounds like that was doing really well for you. So now I'm kind of like, well, I wonder if that had a much larger fan base that I'm
Oh,
completely unaware of.
yeah, man. Of course. Do you know about Bronies?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. All right. So they're picking up the comics too. Good.
Oh yeah, they got the comics too. They had conventions. Like
Hmm.
getting that job was not only could I make a living just drawing the comics, there was this whole other part of it where I could go do these Brony conventions, and at a certain point there was like one every month or so. Like you could always go somewhere
Wow.
and set up and do a Milo Pony convention.
Where are some of
Um,
these places you've been to? Like, where are some places that host like the best Brony conventions? I gotta
Well,
know.
the biggest one was in Baltimore. That wrapped up in 2019, like right before COVID, really. Um, that was just BronyCon. And then the ones that are still hanging on, there's one in San Francisco, and then there's one in Seattle called Everfree Northwest that I'm still going to because I so I worked on the comic book, and then I got hired as a writer on the TV show too. So I
Wow.
got to sort of like extend the My Little Pony thing a little bit
Yeah.
longer than um yeah.
Dude,
So yeah,
you are definitely in someone's like Mount Rushmore of all My Little Things ponies. I can foresee that.
yeah, there's some pony fans like that was crazy too because ponies was like my first regular comics gig, and
Hmm.
it I had done conventions before that for years, and I would like make prints and fan art and like sell whatever little comics I was making at the time, create our own stuff for anthologies or whatever I could get going. And then from going from that to My Little Pony was like I would show up at a convention and they would like they of course they fly me out there and put me up and stuff. Then somebody
Come
comes pick
on,
me up at the
man.
airport. I got like a
What?
personal handler the whole time, you know. They will go get me
That's
coffee and
baller.
stuff. There's VIP suites and they pay you like a per diem. It was like going from being literally nobody to being like Jim Lee at a Comic Con, you know,
That's
on
so
a much
dope.
smaller scale. You know, only
Yeah,
like
yeah, yeah.
2,000 people go to a Brony convention, but still
Yeah.
pretty.
No, that is. I mean, you hear all the jokes and things about bronies and stuff, but you got to imagine that like we're also talking about people, adults with disposable income and organization and like
Yeah.
regardless of the jokes, like that is a passionate fan base that is comparable to any passionate fan base. So that is pretty cool that they've got. It sounds like the money's over there with the bronies, right? Y'all might be laughing, but I just got picked up in a limo with the coffee ready.
I did get picked up in limos.
That's
They put me up
badass.
in the Four Seasons sometimes. Shit was crazy.
That's
Very
so
cool.
dope. So, I guess on the topic of like conventions and travel, I know that I think on the Image website there's a blurb that says, your work has sold millions of copies, which I guess aligns with what you said about stray dogs. But it also mentioned that a lot of your work has been translated in other languages for different countries. What has been, I guess, what's been the most interesting place you've gotten to go or opportunity you've gotten to do because of comics? And then I guess what's the most unique place that you've seen your work out in the wild?
Hmm, that's interesting. Oh, definitely I know the most unique place. Uh, I haven't done too much like international travel. I've been to England, I've been to
Hmm.
the Netherlands, um, for conventions. I'm just not like I set up all my conventions myself, so I'm not like on the track. I'll have friends will hit me up and be like, "Hey, come with us. We're going to whatever." John Lehman, who did Chew, is a friend of mine, and he's always getting invited to some cool overseas show, but it never works out with my schedule. Um, so I haven't been to too many overseas shows. But the craziest place I ever saw my work was so when we started making the My Little Pony comics. I can't believe there's this much pony content in this podcast. I didn't expect this at all. Uh,
We got to
we
give the
started
people what they want.
all the stuff that was on Pony merchandise up until then was from like this one My Little Pony like asset set basically,
Hmm.
right? Like here's the ponies, and if you want to license out their stuff, you want to make T-shirts or pencil boxes or whatever, you can use from these assets. And then once we started making the comics, all of that stuff just went into Hasbro's assets and they could just use it. Like we don't have any rights to it, but it would go
Wow.
right into Hasbro and then they could license it right back out to be on
Hmm.
t-shirts, you know. So there were a few times a few of us would draw something and then it would just end up on a t-shirt or on like a blanket or um and so for a little while they had a bunch of hot topic printed shirts of just my pony stuff, and I did one that was they had this My Little Pony character. It was like Doctor Who. His name is Doctor Hooves, and he's at. It's just like a cool drawing of him that I did, and they made it into a T-shirt. And then a Brony died, and this is
Get
like
out of here, man.
a meme. And he was buried like with all his Brony stuff, like his plush ponies and stuff, and then like a wall of T-shirts that he was also being buried with, and one of them was my T-shirt. So there's just like this picture. It's disturbing, but if you Google it, you can see a picture of this dead guy
Oh,
in his
stop.
casket with one being buried with one of my pieces.
Tony, that might be one of my favorite answers I've ever heard on the podcast. I don't know where you were going with that, but that was morbid and
Yeah,
funny and interesting as hell. Thank you for that. And thank you
that's what I
for
do.
taking. Yeah, no, you killed it on that. I guess shifting. to why I've got you here, which is really just to talk about all the comics you're doing. But I got to give a big shout out to Amy Ranello from Dynamite for setting this up. You
Yeah.
are currently working on the Army of Darkness Forever comic series. It is currently on issue 9. By the time this interview comes out, I'm going to do my absolute best to have this episode up by the time issue 10 comes out, which will be June 26th. No, I'm sorry. Issue 9 will be out by the time this episode comes out, which will be on June 26th. I understand that you have been writing it since, like I said, since issue 1. I think the series launched in 2023. I also understand that it immediately picks up after the director's cut of Sam Raimi's, iconic, Evil Dead from 1992. I guess, what does that mean in terms of like story, and how did the opportunity come up for you to write an iconic character like Ash Williams?
So the story thing, it's basically at the end of Army of Darkness. If you've seen Army of Darkness, Ash gets like sent to medieval times. Like at the end of Evil Dead 2, he gets sucked into this portal and he gets sent to medieval times. And then all through Army of Darkness, he's sort of like a Connecticut Yankee in King Arthur's court. Like he's just like this man out of time in medieval times fighting against these evil demons. And then he fights against like an evil version of himself and little miniature versions of himself. It's a whole thing. But at the end of it, he ends up back in his own time. This wise man gives him this uses the Necronomicon
Like a potion.
90s.
Yeah.
And the version that we saw here in the U.S., he goes back to S-Mart and he tells the story of what happened to him, and then this evil Deadite lady attacks them in the S-Mart, and he kills her, and then grabs this gal and he kisses her and he says, "Hail to the king, baby," and that's the end of the movie. But in the international
Classic.
version, and was the deleted scene, they said here that it was too much of a bummer ending, but in the international version, Ash takes this potion from the wise man, and he's supposed to drink 6 drops of it, and each drop will make him sleep for 100 years. And he accidentally drinks an extra drop, and he wakes up in the post-apocalypse. Like he's got a big long beard, like Rip Van Winkle, and he stumbles out and he sees the whole world's been exploded, and he's like, "Oh, I slept too long." And I was always so like ever since I saw that ending on the first Army of Darkness DVD that I saw, I was like, that's so much cooler. Like I would have loved to seen where they went from there, like what
Hmm.
Ash in the future. And I read articles and interviews with Sam Raimi and Bruce Campbell and about how like they were going to do this sort of Ash versus the Techno Army of Darkness, and then eventually years later they made the TV show Ash versus Evil Dead, and they just sort of did the sequel to the regular ending, like where it went
Hmm.
from after the regular ending. And so when Dynamite hit me up and asked about doing the book, I was like, "Well, has anyone done the sequel to that international ending?" And they've had the license for like 20 years. They started doing this book in 2004. But at the time, nobody had. And so I was just like, "Well, I would love to do that." And they sort of let
Wow.
me, come up with an idea for it. And the idea I came up with basically was, let's figure out a way to do that ending, but still do the regular ending, and also still. So I sort of set it up like Jason Aaron's Thor. Did you read that?
Hmm. Yeah, absolutely.
So like the God Bomb, God of Thunder Thor, where it's like 3 different Thors. One's young, one's old at the end of
Hmm.
time, one's like Avengers Thor. So I was like, let me do 3 timelines like that. Let's do Ash in the future, and then let's do Ash after Hail to the King, baby, like the 1990s Ash, and then we'll also follow Ash's girl Sheila in the medieval times as things darkness starts to retake the kingdom. Um, so yeah, they've been super, like, hardly anything I've pitched they've been like, you can't do that. Like they let us get a little more graphic with it, because they wanted to keep it at like a PG-13. They've let us be a little more vulgar with it. Um, like it's because Army of Darkness is an R-rated movie. Like he says, fuck,
Hmm.
like there's all kinds of blood and guts and stuff. And so part of what I love about the Evil Dead franchise, especially the first 2 and even the remake and the Evil Dead Rise, like they're disgusting, and so I wanted to bring some of that to it too, as much as we could. Um, so I've sort of tried to lean into the grossness where possible, and just sort of make it into like a big epic sort of fun. Keep the spirit of Ash in it, and
Yeah,
keep
yeah.
it but just
So
sort of like this epic thing.
So it sounds like you're staying true to the spirit of Army of Darkness and Evil Dead and everything that came from the movies. And I guess I just find it really interesting that you found like this pocket. And I'm surprised that no one has thought about doing a sequel to that director's cut, because I do find that concept a little more, even though, they said that, hey, this is a little too depressing for American viewers. I think that one, sometimes I prefer the more sadder ending
Yeah,
because, sometimes life is just real.
yeah, yeah.
Um, so it's interesting that no one had thought about or even pitched that idea. So, like you finding your pocket, and then, obviously, and I've heard this from like Christopher Priest. I had him on the show a couple of weeks ago to talk Vampirella, but he
Hmm.
echoed the same thing you said about working with Dynamite is like, compared to any other publisher he was with, like, Dynamite has been a blessing in terms of like them being like supportive and, open to his ideas. So that's really good to hear. Have you had a
Yeah.
chance to, I guess, I don't know, like, have you had a chance to get in front of, interact, talk to like Sam Raimi or Bruce Campbell? Like, I guess, like, does any of, I know that Dynamite holds the IP, but I guess do they get involved in any way, whether it be their company or directly in terms of like, making sure it's up to par?
Sadly, no.
Hmm.
The MGM owns the license to Army of Darkness, so
Got it.
everything has to run through MGM. But it's just a licensor person that works there. Very nice lady,
Okay.
very supportive. But yeah, Sam doesn't give the yes or no. But basically, what I tried to do was, like I said, I read everything they ever said about what they wanted to
Hmm.
do with the sequel, and so I put all that stuff in it, and then just sort of. It's not like I was just using their ideas and then
Yeah, yeah.
connect dots, but like they had such cool ideas. I was like, oh yeah, of course we would do that, and of course we would do this, and then just sort of made it into a quest and made it into like the sort of journey that Ash would go on and the sort of
Yeah.
adventure Ash would go on. So,
I mean, like that's like the closest you'll get to. I mean, let's be real. That's probably the closest you'll get to collaborating with them. And I mean, that's like, that's research. That's coming out of their mouths. So some of these
hmm.
story beats, I'm sure other fans probably have wanted to see that kind of conceptualized in some way.
Oh,
And
for sure.
what better medium than comics? Now
I
I
mean,
understand that. Good.
the first issue of it is basically co-written by Sam and Ivan Raimi. Like it's
That's
just
cool.
like a recap issue because it's like we do go through all the where he's been up until now, up until the part where he slept too long, because you have to sort of like set that up. You
Yeah.
can't just jump in and expect that people saw the same DVD I saw
Mhm.
of Army of Darkness. So,
Yeah.
so it's like the first issue is like a pretty complete recap of everything we saw before, and so it has like lines from the movies and scenes from the movies, and
Cool.
so people that I remember when it came out, I wanted them to do it like as a free comic book day, or maybe it's just like a primer or giveaway or something,
Hmm.
because it's like
Like a ash
this
can or
didn't have
something.
hardly anything new in it, but we need people to see this for them to,
Yeah.
um,
Yeah.
yeah.
So issue 11, I think the solicitations stop at issue 11. Is it safe to say that's where the series ends? Issue 11?
No, there's a 12, and then
Oh,
we're
cool.
doing special after 12 too. So there's uh, 12 full issues,
Okay.
and then we're doing a 30-page special. It's not really a finale. Like 12 will be the finale of the story,
Hmm.
but um, we cooked up an idea for the special where I had written into I think issue 7 or 8 when we went because we had talked about the first arc and that was all outlined pretty detailed, and then the second arc was a little looser. And when we got closer to it, I started outlining that, and then the editor Joe Ryband was like, um, "Let's do a special here." And I had written issue 7 or 8, and it had this beat in it where Ash gets thrown into this big pit full of like deadites, and he has to fight them all. And rather than show the whole fight, you just turn the page and it says like 327 deadites later, you know.
Yeah.
And
Get the
and
point
I thought
across.
that was sort of fun. But then when we decided to do the special, um, I was like, well, let's do that 2 more times in the other timelines. And then at the end, we can do a special where we just show those fights. So, like the very last issue of Army of Darkness Forever is special. I think we're calling it Army of Darkness Gore Ever. So it's just all blood and guts and fighting, and
Badass.
it's like filling in these fights that we skipped over, and
Yeah.
then
Giving
also
the
have
people.
a fun little story and 3 different artists.
That's cool. That sounds like a nice reward for the folks that are staying with it and seeing the series to the end. I do want to go ahead and mention that, like I said, the goal is to have this episode out by the time issue 9 comes out on June 26th. For anyone that is a trade waiter that likes to wait for trades, there is an Army of Darkness Forever Volume 1 trade that is coming out on August 14th, which I think aligns with issue 11. Tony, do you like doing like shorter runs, or like do you prefer like these 12 issue maxi series, or even going longer? Like, do you have a preference in terms of like length of story, or is it just depends on like the project and the characters that you're writing?
Yeah, I think it depends on the project. With this sort of thing, I feel like 12 is a nice number.
Yes.
Like it feels like a real, like you get to tell a real story that really matters. Stray
Hmm.
Dogs, we wrote that as 5 issues, because it was sort of like I'd never done, when I wrote Stray Dogs issue 2, I think that was the first time I'd written any issue 2. Like I hadn't written anything longer than just like one shots before that. And so, um, that was just sort of like figuring out what, like what the shape of that was, and what would
Hmm.
work. But we knew Stray Dogs had like a ending that was a fine, like a finite ending. You haven't got to it yet, so I won't say what it is. But when you get to the end of Stray Dogs, you'll be like, "That's the end for sure." Um,
Good to know.
and so, that's like I like the idea of that being 5 issues. But Feral is an ongoing series, and Local Man
Hmm.
is an ongoing, and like I like the idea of that sort of thing too, where you build a story engine basically that you can use to tell a million different stories and go in a million different directions. Or something like this, or like Uncanny Valley, where it's like this, it has a shape almost like the shape of a movie, or like a novel or something, where it's just like this has a 3 acts, and we
Hmm.
break them down into a couple issues each, and at the end of it, you get like a big satisfying ending.
Tony, you know what I like about, aside from, actually, there's a lot I like about Local Man. I've said it in our year end episode. Like, it was one of my favorite comic books of 2023, if not like the best. But I like the strategy that you and Tim Seeley have with that book, where I think it's like what, every 5 or 6 issues, you guys will put out that's the end of one story arc, and then you guys will put out an annual for new readers. Like, I've gotten, hell, I got my best friend Drew onto Local Man by giving him that annual, and he worked his way back. So, I hear you. I feel like you're a man chock full of good ideas, right? Like the Army of Darkness, finding that pocket, that kind of untapped story potential, and then like the cadence that you have with Local Man, and then I think to uh, um, Stray Dogs. In an interview you said that you had noticed after coming off of My Little Pony that there wasn't a lot of animal books, books about animals on adventures and things like that. And, that's why you put that into the world. So I'm like, man, this guy's like chock full of like really good ideas. And I was curious, like, where does that come from? Like, what type of media do you consume? Like, are you doing any creative exercises? Like, how do you get the creative juices going, on a regular basis?
You asking me where I get my ideas from, Badr? Uh,
I'm like, give me the secrets. All right, give me the secret sauce.
um,
I guess I'm just curious, like, what inspires you? Like, what do you think are
yeah.
cool? Like, what do you think is cool out there?
Well, I feel like if I have I mean, I don't think that I'm untalented, but I think if there's something that I'm really good at, it's understanding the vibe of something.
Hmm.
Like when me and
It's a
collaborators get
good
into a
word.
story, I'm oftentimes the I've sort of like on Local Man for sure. Seeley will tell you that like I'm the one that's in charge of making sure that it feels local manny. Like
Hmm.
the keep the vibe on the right
Yeah.
track. Um, and that so from that comes stuff like you know horror stories with animals, or like like being able to sort of feel out something that feels like this feels like something, and it should have these types of things in it. Like
Hmm.
and that's sort of like ethereal, but that comes from like when I talk to other people about like making their own stuff, and I feel like it all just comes from being able to harness the things that you love and the things that you're into, and that sort of becomes your point of view. Like the way you're raised, the place you come from, the everything that's, how many people are in your family, how you get along with people, and like all of that sort of like gets channeled through you. And then when you come to a story, like there's only several, there's like, what do they say, like five different stories. So you're just
Hmm.
sort of like always telling the same story, but the difference is like who's telling it, with what characters, and how are, so the ideas that I like, the idea we had for Local Man was sort of um, came from Tim and I both loving those Image comics, but loving them in a different way than I think a lot of people did. Where we sort of love the energy of them, and
Hmm.
the way I think about them is that you know people look back at those books. You get them out of like dollar piles or quarter piles now, and they're made by like 22-year-old kids who just have all the power in the world, and they're just like all this sort of like testosterone and guns and big titty mamas, and just like all like everything is about like it has like religious overtones, and but also none of it, it's all sort of sanitized still, like comic books. Like they'll murder people with like guns that have knives on them, but they won't say shit, or so it's like this interesting thing. But I think about it the same way people who liked like Bronze Age comics think about those. Like they're
Hmm.
just made, as a disposable entertainment for kids. Uh, and for that time, like the way it hit me was it excited me so much. Like the energy that those comics had in them gave me such a jolt of excitement, and the limitless creativity of people that are working for themselves and not for somebody else was like got into my bones.
Hmm.
And so making up Local Man, we were like, let's do something that harnesses that talks about that, and that sort of treats those characters the way um, like Dark Knight treats Batman,
Hmm.
or like, not that we're as good as Dark Knight, but like, Dark Knight, Frank Miller, a smart guy, takes Batman, a children's character, and goes, well, what if he had real shit going on, and real, like, what if his back hurt, and what, and what if everything got worse than he could handle, and he quit, you know? And so it was basically that, like, let's take this idea, these characters, and treat them with the same sort of respect that people treat
Hmm.
Marvel and DC characters. And we weren't using um, Youngblood or Wildcats or whatever a lot of times because they don't live at Image anymore. But we wanted to sort of like say something about that time. And Tim draws just like Image comics
Oh
look
yeah.
in the '90s, and I can do a pretty good sort of like crime noir-y, photo ref style. And so we're just like, like Robert Rodriguez, El Mariachi, like what are the things that we have? What can we put together to make a story with?
I guess as a reader, there are as I'm getting familiar with your art style, I think I'm starting to do a better job at identifying like when it's Tim Seeley's artwork. I know that he does like a majority of the back half,
Hmm.
the flashback, the '90s set portion of the comics, and you do a lot of the Jack Xavier and the
Hmm.
town. But I know that sometimes that line gets a little blurred. Like
Yeah.
I guess how often? I guess is there an easy way to tell when it's Tim Seeley versus yours? Like, how do you guys go about picking and choosing like who does what? Because even among like some of my other diehard Wednesday Warrior comic friends, we'll be like, yeah, it's Tony Fleecs and Tim Seeley. Like, the game is like, all right, well, who drew this panel? Sometimes we'll play that
Right.
game of like, all right, well, who drew this one? You think so and so did this? Who wrote this page?
Well, writing, you shouldn't be able to tell us apart, but in the art, I it's very obvious to me, but I'm pretty familiar with what I draw like. But the way we play it on the inside of the book, for the most part, is when Jack feels heroic himself, because it's all about him sort of being, on the outs, and not being in a great place personally, and sort of like hopefully on a journey to some sort of redemption. And so when he feels good about himself, when he feels heroic again, Seeley always draws those panels because
Hmm.
that's like what he looked like when he was a hero. And so he might not be in the full crossjack uniform, but like in issue 1, there's just one panel where he's like, "All right, everybody, step back," and that's just Seeley just drew that panel. Um, and then in issue 5, I think, of the first run, see, like there's a part where like he's facing off with the bad guy, and he picks up a shield and he gets to kick the guy's ass, and for a second he looks like Tim Seeley drew him. Um,
Got it. Got it.
so yeah, that's the fun part of doing a book with another writer artist, is that we can just pass these things back and forth so easily. We both draw digitally, like we both draw, I think, in Procreate.
Hmm.
I know I do. I think he does too. And so I'll just draw something, and if it has a little spot where it needs Celia to hook something up in there, I'll just shoot it over to him and text him or send an email and just be like, "Hey, it's on the Dropbox. Put this. And usually he gets it before I wake up in the morning.
Good stuff.
He's a hustler, like I'm a hustler. Like he goes very hard.
Hell yeah. I'll go ahead and say once again, for anyone that's listening that might not be reading Local Man, and in my opinion, it's probably like the best bang for your buck, because you're essentially getting two stories. You've got the front matter, then you literally turn the comic book over. You've got the second story in a flashback form. But I'll go ahead and give Tim Seeley even more flowers and say I look forward to his letter page like no one else. Like I think he writes in such a smart way. Like he's really honest about the industry and what books are out. So to me, like Local Man is like a full package comic. I gladly give whatever. I don't even know how much it is. It's just like, yo, Ben, come on. I need Local Man. Yeah, $4 exactly, and you get so much. So once again, I think it goes back to the compliment I said that your approach to the comic books is really interesting in ensuring that the fans and readers are getting a full story. You're always teamed up with like some incredible artists and whatnot. So really happy to be talking to you right now, and because we've given Tim Seeley so much love, I want to talk about some of your other collaborators and artists that you've worked for. So I'm going to say a couple names, and I want you to tell me what comes to mind, whether that be just some words, a thought, or maybe even an anecdote, all right? So let's start with... Where the hell did I have my list at? Okay. All right, how about this? How about we start with Tone Rodriguez, who is the artist on Feral. What words come to mind for Tone Rodriguez?
So Tone Rodriguez, out of all my collaborators, is the one who I'm closest friends with. We worked together in a studio for since like 2009. From 2009 to like 16, I think, is when he moved away. But we used to live right next door to each other. Like I rented the house next to him because I was just in the studio working so much.
Oh wow.
But we would work together on projects, and he's just such a like excellent comic book maker, like and he can just do, like, you can just give him a thing and tell him go and he can just knock it out. He's like a machine. And when I started making creator-owned comics and I started writing stuff, he was too busy at the time to like be the artist on these things, and sort of like I couldn't afford it. But what we could do is I could pay him to do layouts. So I did this book Time Shopper, and I paid him to do layouts for that because my buddy Christian, who drew it, was a newer artist and hadn't done a lot of sort of panel to panel storytelling. So I was like, well, let me get Tone to do layouts, and then you just draw over that, and that worked out great. And then that was what I did right before Stray Dogs. And again, with Stray Dogs, Trish Forstner was a brand new comic artist. Like, she hadn't done panel to panel stuff before. So I was like, well, no problem there. You're dope at drawing dogs. And we can get you the rest of the way there. With Tone will draw the backgrounds and the layouts and stuff like that. And so he did that for Stray Dogs. And then when we got to Feral, he'd always been credited as the layout artist. And in between Stray Dogs and Feral, he started working digitally. He'd been just doing stuff on paper up until then. And when he figured out digital, it's like he sort of leveled up again.
Wow.
And Trish did Feral digitally. And so just like Tim and I worked together on Local Man, I was like, well, on this one, why don't you just be co-artist? And so instead of just drawing the layouts, just have you draw all the backgrounds, and then just don't draw the cats and don't draw the raccoons or wolves or whatever. And then Trish will come in and draw that part, and then just sort of like funnel it together and put it out that way. So that's how we do that. So Tone, one of my best friends, he actually comes out and stays at my house like probably every 6 weeks or so, every 2 months, and we'll just like go work together in the studio like we used to do, because he lives in Louisiana now. But we'll go work in the studio, and I'll be drawing Local Man, or I'll be drawing, thumbnails for Farrell or whatever, and then he'll just be there, just drawing Farrell, in the studio on his iPad. So it's fun.
That is so cool to hear. I don't think I hear too many, I mean, we live in a digital age. Of course, it makes sense to like, work via email, Dropbox, and things like that. But I don't think I hear too many, collaborators have an opportunity to like be in the same room and bounce off that energy. In my mind, as someone that, is also a big music buff, you know, it's always cool to hear when like artists get a chance to like be in the same room and bounce off that energy and just that direct contact. I think
Yeah.
in the right hands, it produces something really magical to be,
Yeah.
really magical being in the same proximity and feeding off each other like that.
Oh, agreed. Yeah, and then it's just like you're there with somebody else who works on the same thing. So you're like Trish and I have gone on like signing tours together. We'll spend tons of time together, and we'll be able to sort of like kick story ideas back and forth. Or Tone and I, when we're working together, we'll sort of stick kick story ideas back and forth. So it's really like creative
Hmm.
times. Like it's fun times to have to be working on a thing together in the same place.
That's cool. All right. What comes to mind when I say Dave Wachter? Wachter?
Wachter, yeah.
Wachter.
Bones
Uh,
Bones with Factor.
Wachter. Who is the artist on Uncanny Valley with you?
Again, this is a guy I've known for maybe 20 years. We came into the industry at around the same time. We both were doing like self-published or small press stuff, like in message board days. And we worked together on like a tiny project back then. And then we just sort of kept in contact because we both went to IDW at around the same time. We both
Hmm.
had like the same editor there. He did Turtles and I did Ponies. And then when he started getting Marvel stuff and like doing like he had did a bunch of cool like creator owned miniseries and stuff. I always kept up with them and would like keep in touch, and sometimes we would do conventions together. So we're like IRL friends. And then years ago, I had pitched him this idea for Uncanny Valley, which I don't even think was called Uncanny Valley at the time, but it was just this idea about a kid who finds out that he's part cartoon, and it's sort of like real world and cartoon world, and all this sort of like cartoon stuff starts happening in the real world. And I asked him if he wanted to draw it, but I was like, I'm thinking of having two artists where one guy draws the real world stuff and one guy draws the cartoon stuff. Would you want to draw the real world stuff? Because he's like a great realistic artist, and I don't think I'd seen him draw anything cartoony. And but he was like, that sounds like you're asking me to do the boring parts of. And so I was like, all right, fair enough. Like he stood up for himself, point taken. Um, and then it was literally years before somebody sort of picked that story out of like I have this document of all my story ideas, and
Hmm.
boom, looked at that whole document, and they were like, tell us about more about Uncanny Valley, and we started talking about it. And when we got to figuring out who the artist was, they were sort of leaning towards these artists who were all cartoony,
Hmm.
which as a cartoony artist myself, I know that it's more difficult to find somebody who can do that and also draw realistic than it would be to find somebody that can draw realistic but then also can do cartoony. So I
Yeah.
remembered talking to Dave about this, and I just texted him before I even mentioned it to Boom, and I was like, "Hey, can you draw cartoons too? Like, I'm back on this thing." And literally, the text was like, 10 years after I had brought it up to him the first time. Like, we hadn't talked about it again since then. But he was
Yeah.
like, yeah, "I can do that." And really, I think he was bullshitting. Like, I think he was just sort of like, as an artist, and so he sort of thinks about comics as like you need to be able to draw everything. You need to be able to draw
Hmm.
like a toaster and a Volkswagen Beetle, and like whatever is in the script, you need to be able to draw that. And so he was like, "Yeah, I can draw any different kind of cartoon character, sure." And so I was like, "All right, well, let me." So I took it to Boom, and now we make this book together, and it's a true delight making this thing. Like we talked earlier about how I'm sort of heavy-handed with artists that I work with, and in this case is the least heavy-handed that I am, which is still a
Hmm.
little bit, uh, but he delivers such like cool looking stuff where um, like I think we made something that looked really interesting with Stray Dogs and with Feral, where it looked like a certain kind of thing. And I think Dave is doing that again with this, where it looks like a Roger Rabbit, or it looks like a, like a Space Jam or a
Oh
Cool
yeah.
World. There's real people and cartoon people right next to each other.
Man,
Um,
I think I'm starting to realize that I've probably been overthinking your books. I think because I know that you're an artist, so I'm always like, oh, I wonder if he, I'll see your name, and then and obviously in this case for Uncanny Valley, I've also seen Dave's name, and I think when I read that first issue and seeing the two different art styles, I was like, oh, okay, so Tony drew this, and I think the next day I really dug into it. I'm like, oh no, this is all from Dave, like.
yeah,
And I mean, I was blown away because to your point, like he effortlessly switches styles like it's nothing. Like the cartoony
yeah,
stuff looks like it could literally be, an animated, a Warner Brothers cartoon. And then when he gets into the realistic aspect, it's like, yo, this has got to be someone different. So now I'm sitting here like, man, this whole time I've been confusing. Like I've been overthinking. Uncanny Valley and Local Man, like you really have kind of cemented yourself in these writing positions, and you're letting like your collaborators like do what they do best. And it sounds like having like that personal connection with with Dave, um and Tim and Tone, like there it sounds like you've got an opportunity to like kind of sit back and let them do their magic. They know what you like, and you guys have that rapport that makes it easy. But yeah, dude, you've worked, I mean, the roster that you've worked with, insane amount of talent.
thanks, man. Yeah, well, what I like about it is, I these are people that I'm friends with, and I feel like I see their stuff, and I see it in a, like, I see it differently than how they've been
Probably they
used,
even see it too, right?
or that, yeah, like
Hmm.
see the moves that they could be making that they're not even seeing. And so what I feel
Yeah.
like has worked out great is sort of, um, like having these friends of mine who are insane talents, and putting doing something that they have never done before, and
Yeah.
sort of, and like, I feel like that's exciting to see. Like I feel like readers respond to that too, where they're just like, that I didn't
Yeah.
see that before ever.
Yeah, no, I'm telling you, Uncanny Valley. When I read the first issue, I immediately called my Drew, my best friend, who was in like this Ducktales thing. Like he found like the last Ducktales animated cartoon, which came out
Hmm.
not too long ago. So he was like really into like going back to old cartoons and Looney Tunes and things. And I'm like, dude, you got to read this. And I did, I think, a poor job of describing. I'm like, then there's like cartoon effects in that real life. And he was like, yo, say less. And now that's like one of his favorite books. So once
Nice.
again, like the comics that you're putting out to me are really fresh, and the ideas and the hooks are really interesting. And I want
Real
to
excited about that. But Uncanny Valley, I think if we can pull it off, like I think we're going to, I feel like that's going to be a big deal.
oh yeah.
Or just like, the few thousand people that read it will really like it, or I
Yeah.
can't predict how, like, the success of it will be, but
Mhm.
if it comes off like I think it's going to come off, I'm very excited for the end of it, and for people to see it.
Now, obviously, the numbers. Like we're talking comics, like numbers are important. Like how many books are ordered, and like it'd be foolish not to say, hey, that is important. But I guess for you personally, like what does success look like? Is it like a personal satisfaction thing where you're like, yo, I got to tell the story I wanted to, and if you like it, you like it. But for me, this is the story I need to get off my chest. Or do you have other factors, or is it like the fan thing? Like, do you consider success like, hey, thousands of fans really like this, or is it an amalgam of both? I imagine probably an amalgam of both.
Yeah, it's a combination of those things. I mean, just practically, like, can I pay my bills, and not have to do, other jobs? Like, ideally, I'll get down to like a manageable number of books where I can have, like, clock off at some point, and,
Hmm.
go on vacation sometimes and stuff like that too.
Yeah, you need it. You deserve it, man.
Um, but yeah, success is like, do people like the books?
Hmm.
I'm not losing money for anybody,
There
like
we go.
the people that I work for are all, like, find see a value in having me around.
Hmm.
And then yeah, can I pay my bills? I feel like that's it. The other stuff is all the like, that's special. That feels like more than success. That's like, oh, that's fucking cool.
Yeah.
Like when it's like crazy successful, or you get nominated for something, or it gets optioned, or like all that's like extra. If I can just do like that middle ground, you know, get
Hmm.
by, handle everything, not be scared or worried or,
Yeah, man. That's awesome to hear. I got one more person's name I want to bring up since we talked about Army of Darkness forever. I would feel remiss if I didn't mention what comes to mind when you hear Justin Greenwood's name, who I know that
another
yeah, got it.
yeah, another close friend of mine. Justin lives in Northern California, and we know each other through my buddy Dennis Culver, who edits Feral and who's the writer on Unstoppable Doom Patrol at DC, and he's done a bunch of. He's a writer. But we've known each other for years, and through the pandemic, we were on uh, like a virtual studio, basically, where like we would all get on Google Hangouts and just sort of like be together when the rest of the world, when nobody was together in the world, and we just sort of like be there working and making our comics. So I was like making Stray Dogs around him um and all this other stuff that's coming out now. I started working on hanging out with Justin and other friends, Ramon Villalobos and Sophie Campbell and Dennis and Chris Burnham and
That is an insane lineup of names you just said, like Sophie
pretty good.
Campbell, Bill Burn. Yeah, wow,
Yeah,
that's awesome.
not Bo Burnham. He was
Yeah,
he was
I realized after I said I was like, Butter, that's the
he was
comedian, you
doing
idiot.
something else in the pandemic. He
But
was
he would have
making
been there. Yeah, he would have been there. He was shooting a special.
he might not have made that special if he would have just been hanging out with me and my friends. We weren't lonely like that. Um, but yeah, so Justin, I've always been a fan of his work. He did a book with my buddy Dennis called Crone at Dark Horse. That's sort of like Old Man Red Sonja, like it's like a
Hmm.
Red Sonja at the end of her journey type story. And when I talked to Dynamite about Army of Darkness, we like everything had been going great, and then they started sending me artists, and nothing really felt like the vibe that I saw. The again, like how I said, I can sort of feel like what the vibe
Mm-hmm.
is of things. Nothing felt like it was just that. And then Justin was down here when Local Man launched. He had started a book at the same time called Torrent, and that was coming out. And I was looking at these artists that they're sending. I was like, man, I wish you could just draw this thing. And he was like, well, I'm wrapped up with Torrent. Like, what do you got? And so we just started talking, and then I talked to Joe, the editor of the book, and was just like, what about Justin? He's done this. He did Stumptown with Greg Rucka, and he's got a cool pedigree, and he's never done like a licensed book like this. Like he doesn't. There's I think it would be cool to get him on this, and they were like, yeah, that'd be awesome. And so he just came in, and similar to Dave, I love Justin's storytelling so much, and I trust his instincts and stuff like that. And I also love that he has like this sort of like cool, like Frank Millery, cartoony bounce to his work. And I
Mm-hmm.
felt like that sort of matched the character of Ash and the sort of like not all the way serious nature of the Evil Dead movies. Like
Yeah.
they're like the stakes are real. People really die and get dismembered and torn apart and stuff, but there's also like this sort of like sarcastic, wackiness to them. And I felt like that Justin had that in his work. So that was super fun to get to work with. The only like it was a bummer that he couldn't do the whole deal. He's always committed to like 6 projects out. So he had a little window where he could do the first 6 with us, and then luckily I met Pop Man at a convention just as he was wrapping up, and I'd been like a super fan of that guy when I was a kid. Like in those Image comics that I talked about that filled me with such like creative spark. Some of his were those, and so like I talked to him, and he was just it looked like he wanted to work together, and I was like, I have this book, I have this opportunity. So
Wow. So the two big takeaways I got from all of these name drops is that Tony's two keys to success: have insanely talented friends and
mhm.
be able to read the vibes. You gotta be,
Mhm.
that's something they don't teach you in school, like taste and being able to like tap in and read the vibes, good vibes
Taste
at
is
that.
a big deal. I remember um, like before Kanye West was crazy. when he would talk about like his taste level and like the stuff that he was inputting was different than what everybody else was inputting, and that's what made his
Mhm.
stuff different. Was like, I remember like he was into like what's his name, the guy that made Eternal Sunshine of the Spotless Mind. Uh,
Oh,
uh,
it'll come to both of us when we least expect it. But
yeah,
I know who you're talking about. Yeah.
but I remember around the time of, because he also I think directed. Anyway, like Kanye was way into that guy, and I remember like that was
Michael
influenced.
Gondry. Michael
Yeah, that's
Gondry.
right. Yeah,
Yeah, Michael
Michelle.
Gondry.
And then
Michelle. Thank you, Michelle.
he found the composer of that movie and put him on late registry. Like, so it's just sort of like seeing different pieces in different things and thinking like that could work in the thing that I make, and but also having different inputs than like if everybody just read the same stuff or watched the same TV shows, then the comics that they make are gonna feel pretty much the same. So
I,
I feel like I'm cooking up a different kind of stew.
No, it's apparent and it's a damn good stew. And I hope you know that you might have opened the floodgates to my back pocket hip hop questions I had because
Let's go.
John, I think it's John Bryan.
John Bryan,
Man,
yeah.
I'm butchering all types. It's been a long week, folks. But John Bryan was the composer for
Yeah.
Eternal Sunshine of the Spotless Mind, who was a big influence on Late Registration, which, in my opinion, I mean, it's like one A or it flip flops for me between one A and one B of Kanye's best albums. I think My Beautiful Dark Twisted Fantasy
Yeah.
is like his number
Yeah.
one, but on some days I'm like, Late Registration just for just how lush it is, the harmonies, the melodies, the instrumentation. I mean, that is, yeah. But I did have a
Like
question
John
about,
Bryan is I feel him the most on Gone, which is
oh
like maybe the
yeah,
best. Like because
Gone is that the
the
one?
strings and stuff.
Yeah, is Gone the wait? That's not the one with Cameron, is it? Gone is.
Yeah, I
Oh,
think it
okay.
is. Yeah, asking Cam how long had this gone on?
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah,
Okay,
yeah.
so I gotta ask. It sounds like I already know the answer. I was gonna ask, are you a hip hop head? Because there's two pieces of evidence that peaked, like made my ears perk.
Interesting.
Uh, One was on your Twitter handle. You know, it's like, hey,
Yeah.
writer of
Yeah.
Stray Dogs logo, da da da. But then at the very last bit, you write half man, half amazing, and
Yeah, of
obviously the Nas song starts playing in my head, half man, half
course.
amazing. You know,
Yeah.
and then the second piece that I'm like, I wonder if there's any connection here. Your first, I don't know if it's your first book, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think the one that puts you on the map, like your first book that really puts you on the map, In My Lifetime.
Yeah.
Is that a reference to Jay-Z's second album? Come on, man.
Well,
Tony.
it's a
Okay,
reference to the song, the single before the
sure.
second
Yeah,
one.
yeah.
Yeah.
For sure. Yeah, yeah. In My
Yeah.
Lifetime. Come on. All
Yeah.
right. It's funny that I guess it's not funny, but it's kind of like coincidental and a lot of things going on. Yesterday, I was scrolling on Instagram and I came across some random video of this like badass nurse rapping the lyrics to Jay-Z's Imaginary Players. She was like really like spitting these bars. So I've been playing In My Lifetime Volume 1 all day today. You know, because when you hear Imaginary Players, you're like, well, I guess I might as well play the album.
Yeah.
So that's super dope that you're a hip hop head and I caught all these references. Come on, let's go. All right. And I guess I'll use this to actually before I ask my question. I guess what are some of your favorite albums and favorite artists? It sounds like you are a fan of some similar artists that I like. It sounds like you've kind
Yeah.
of come up from that golden age and like the classics, the Nas, the Jays, and all that.
Yeah, I love Wu-Tang.
Hell yeah.
And I go pretty hard on Wu-Tang. Uh, I super. I mean, obviously, 36 Chambers, but I really like the RZA Bobby Digital album a lot.
Oh,
Even when it
that's a
gets wacky and crazy.
yeah.
Um, I've been going back a lot through Wu-Tang recently. But
I caught them with Wu Tang and Nas obviously have been touring and they came to
yeah,
Jacksonville. So I caught them there and then I went to Philadelphia for the Roots picnic. So I caught Method Man and Redman there and Black Dot also came out. So it
oh
was
yeah, I saw
awesome.
clips of that. I
Yeah.
saw
It was
clips of them rapping together.
yeah.
Yeah, that's crazy. I skipped the. I had tickets to the '97 Rage Against the Machine Wu Tang tour,
Oh
and then
wow.
Wu Tang bailed. Like they only made it on the first few dates, and then the Roots replaced them. But it was before Things Fall Apart, and so I was not. I didn't know, and so I was
Hmm.
just like, "Fuck this! I'm not even going." And so I did not go see the Roots and Rage Against the Machine in 1997, which would have been amazing to see.
Have you
Uh,
been to any other like rap shows or rap concerts?
I have. I don't go anymore though, because as you can see, I'm quite old, and I don't. I just
I can
get
see
in
you up front
my I get into my head
moshing.
about how I'm supposed. Like, is my head bobbing the right way? I feel like with this beard just it looks like a glow in the dark, like a neon sign. Um,
Oh
I think the
shit.
last one I went to, I went and saw Jay-Z when he was on tour with Justin Timberlake.
Oh,
They
the whatever that towards
Magna
like the
Carta.
2020. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
Magna Carta, Holy Grail. Magna Carta, Holy Grail.
The most
Damn.
polarist record he ever made. It's crazy that that was before um what was it,
Yeah, before 444. Yeah,
yeah.
that was yeah, Magna it was Blueprint 3, Magna Carta Holy Grail, and then 444. I won't lie to you, Magna Carta Holy Grail is one that had to grow on me. Um
It's
I,
inaccessible to anyone that's not a billionaire. Like you listen to it and you're just
Fucking
like
well
this
said.
it's just
It's
rich
way too
people
much
talk.
opulence. You know,
Yes.
it's like, yo, you just did this on Watch the Throne. Why are you ramping up the
Yeah.
rich talk? You know, but I'm glad that he came back with 444, which to
Yeah,
me is like a top five
for sure.
J album. Damn, Tony, if I not like I needed any more reasons to like you, but being a hip hop head is an easy way to win me over. But okay, on the topic of in my lifetime, I wanted to share what I think is one of the funniest blurbs I've ever seen on a book. So I was looking up in my lifetime. I found this random posting or listing on Midtown Comics. In the description, I'll read the description. I've got a question for you here,
Yeah.
but it says, in my lifetime volume, in my lifetime volume one, in my lifetime issue one came out in 2006. Written and drawn by you. The description reads: Tony Fleecs' manhood is on the line. His debut comic explains why girlfriends are barred from comic stores and how cancer improved his sex life. Warren Ellis, creator of Planetary, Transmetropolitan, and The Authority, calls it, quote, brave, brilliantly observed comedy and the first biographical comic in years that hasn't made me want to punch the author in the stomach. Which I think is a fucking great blurb.
That guy's a good
Um,
writer.
yeah, no, he knows a thing or two about
Yeah.
words. What would you say was your welcome to the comic industry moment? Like, what for you personally was like, oh shit, I'm really here. Like, I'm in it.
But that was one of them for sure.
Hmm.
That just sort of came out of message boards. I would like I put that comic together as a like when I was a poster on the Bendis message board.
Oh wow.
And Warren Ellis had his own forum, but he also would post on the Bendis message board sometimes too. And I was asking about like how do I write that solicit basically, like because at the time it was going to be in the back of the catalog, and basically the only way anybody would see this thing was by like what was written in the solicit if they saw it at all. And so I had this sort of like I was like sort of like crowdsourcing ideas, and Warren Ellis popped up and he was like, "You should say this," and he had like a solicit for it, but wasn't quite it. And I was like, "That's awesome that you even popped up in here," because we weren't
Yeah.
friends, we didn't know each other. But I was like, "But that's not quite it. It's not quite the book." And he was like, "Well, let me see the book." And so then I just like sent it to him, and he read it and he said that, and so that felt a lot like it. It wasn't like you're in comics and you can make your living at it, but it did feel like, oh wow, this might be something. And then
Yeah.
when that book came out, it got written up in Wizard Magazine a couple times and like
Yeah.
Comics Buyer's Guide, and so like people noticed it, and that felt a lot like if I went to a comic convention or something, um, and I introduced myself, I could say like I make comics, and I wouldn't feel any kind of sheepish
Yeah.
or anything. Um,
It's like, yo, look, Warren Ellis don't want to punch me in the stomach. I don't know if he can say that about you guys, but he won't punch me.
yeah, that's
That's
true.
dope.
I was eating out on that for a little while.
Yeah. Well, I guess if you had to give advice to any aspiring, comic writers, artists, or just people that want to get in the industry, based on something that you wish you would have known when you first started, that maybe would have made your life a hell of a lot easier.
Yeah.
Like, what would that be?
So when I was a kid thinking about doing this, and when I even when I was younger and actually doing it, I would always think about um, I would set up like a list of things I'd have to do this thing, where it's like, all right, first I got to do this, and after I do that, then I can do this, and then I can do that, and then I can make a comic, and then I can send that comic to Marvel and DC, like sort of make this list in your head, even if it's not as like delineated as that. You do think about it in terms of like, well, I can't just do it. I have to do all these things to get there. And what I learned is that the sooner you just get to doing it, the sooner you can start doing it and getting better at it. And like, the first thing you do might not necessarily be the best thing ever, but it's better to actually start making it and have a critical eye to it, but just keep making stuff, and that's the way you get better at doing it. It's anytime that I've actually just done something, it's usually, and again, this may not work for everyone, but anytime I've actually just sat down and go like, all right, well, I'm going to make this and we're going to do it. Like I did that with Stray Dogs. I did that in my lifetime. I think again, like it helps if you have like an interesting take, if you have a perspective, if you have like, if your taste level is a certain thing, and that makes the things that you put out a different kind of thing, that's helpful. But you have to just actually just start making, making stuff.
What's that saying? Progress. Oh, I'm sorry. Perfection is the enemy of progress. I've also heard it say like, yeah, perfection is the enemy of done. So
Yeah.
it sounds like you just gotta do it, man.
We say
I know.
done is beautiful here.
Well said. Yeah, I like that.
Done is beautiful.
All right, Tony, I've just got a handful of questions, but I'm actually going to take a break from asking questions and let a big fan of yours ask this next question. I've reached out to my local comic shop, the owner of my local comic shop. His name is Ben Kingsbury. He runs Gotham City Limit here in Jacksonville, Florida. He's also been a big fan and sponsor of this show, and anytime that I can get him involved from a retailer perspective to be able to chat with some of the creators I have on, I always jump to the opportunity. He also asks some of the most outlandish and sometimes most creative questions out there. And I know I know that in interviews you've spoken about, just being an ally to comic shops and, really wanting to help them push books and make their lives easier. So I think you'll appreciate him chiming in here. All right, here we go. Which one is it? This one? All right.
Hey, Tony, Ben K, Gotham City Limit, Jacksonville, Florida. I got a couple questions for you today. First has to do with Stray Dogs and Feral. The movie horror homage variant covers have been a smash success, especially here at our shop in Jacksonville. Where did that idea come from? And if you could pick one horror movie that's influenced your writing to this day, which would it be? And then secondly, I personally love Uncanny Valley. Takes me back to the 80s, gives me that Looney Tunes vibes. So if you had to pick one character for Looney Tunes, who you taking? Well, I'll leave you to answer here. Thanks so much. Continued success on all the books. We literally couldn't do it without awesome creators just like you. Hey, in Shortbox Nation, remember, always take it to the limit.
Big shout outs to Ben. Love the energy, man.
Thank you, Ben. All right, easy answer, Lola Bunny. No questions.
Damn good answer.
That's
you're
easy.
You're like Space Jam 1 Lola Bunny at that.
Oh, yeah, not this new Lola.
Yeah, let's be clear. Yeah.
Yeah.
And then his other questions were, the movie posters.
That came from my buddy Dennis. Is a combination of things. My buddy Dennis, who's the editor on Feral, and a retailer out here named Ed Greenberg, who has 3 shops in LA called Collector's Paradise. And at the time that we were putting Stray Dogs together, Bitter Root was doing the like movie homage covers. They did.
Juice.
The Right Thing. Yeah.
Yep.
And he was like, these do great for us. You should do those. And he suggested doing because it was like an animated style, he suggested doing like animated style covers. So do like a Lady and the Tramp and do like, Oliver and Company and stuff. And it didn't hit me just right, partially because when we talked earlier about that chip I had on my shoulder, like part of me wants to do everything myself. Part of me wants to not be beholden to anybody else for anything, And so partially I was like, I don't think that's it. I don't think that's this book. But then I was talking to Dennis about it. We were in the studio together and he said, he was like, well, you should do horror movies. And then I talked to the people at Image and I said, what about horror movies with these dogs on it? And they were like, yeah, that's great because that tells the story of what this book is. It says this is a
Hmm.
horror book that has dogs in it. So it actually, like, I could sort of give myself the permission to bite somebody else's thing a little bit,
Hmm.
um, where I would have felt corny about it otherwise, or I would have felt like this isn't quite the vibe of this thing. Um, but when that came along, I was like, oh, that actually does do like the job for these retailers of saying, if they don't have time to tell somebody this is a horror book with cartoon dogs in it, they can just see the cover of this and it looks like Pet Cemetery and it has a cartoon dog on the cover, or it looks like Annabelle, or it looks like. So that, and then I have this secret superpower of being able to mimic logos and design and stuff like that. Like I can do it as good or better than anybody else. Um, and so I was able to sort of like bring that to bear on this, what ended up being a huge project where at first it was just like, oh, we do this 5 times. I'll be real specific and pick out like my 5 favorite horror movies and we'll do those for the B covers. And then when the book started getting reprinted over and over again, and then people started wanting to do the retailer variant covers, and we did the Dog Days series, and then that had a ton of covers and retailer covers. And so we just ended up doing hundreds of them. Um, and like I said, it's something that I have a, a talent for, as far as like taking something and making it look like another thing. We do that with Local Man. We do
Hmm.
the Image Comics homage covers, and we do that with. So basically, like, once I figured out that you can use that as a trick to say what this book is,
Hmm.
then that sort of like opened up that box for me. Uh,
Wow.
yeah, and as a horror movie that's influenced my writing, not a full horror movie, but I think about the sort of like question and answer parts of Shaun of the Dead a lot, where they sort of like set up something and then they knock it down later, very literally. Like, it's almost like you make it uh, make it make the invisible thing visible, so that somebody else watching it goes like, oh, that's how you do that. So like that's how you set something up in the first act and then you pay it off later. They literally say like, you know like, this thing would never happen, and then later you have that exact thing happen. Like, I find myself doing that sort of stuff all the time.
Yeah. Solid answers. Uh, I guess on the topic of local comic shops, just hearing from Ben, I think I've read somewhere that you're a regular Wednesday warrior too, right? Like, do you go to so you've got a shop that you regularly go into? I guess, what's the shop and what's on your pull list? Like, what are you pulling?
I go to House of Secrets in Burbank. Um, and my pull list, what's on there right now? I just have creators on there. So I'll have them pull like anything Brian K. Vaughan does,
Oh yeah.
anything Ed Brubaker does. I get pretty much all the Kelly Thompson stuff. I like She-Hulk. I like that writer of She-Hulk, Rainbow Rowell,
Hmm.
bunch. I'm less and less Marvel and DC stuff lately, which I sort of go on, like, um, it sort of goes in cycles where
Same.
I'll be all the way out, or I'll have just like be keeping up with a few, and then something will happen, and I'll like I'll go check out the Krakoan era, or I'll go check
Yeah.
out, when they relaunched Star Wars, and I was like, let me check out these Star Wars books or whatever. So that I'll just sort of dip in on those. I think there's a couple DC books I dig. Well, I like Birds of Prey. Um,
Birds of Prey is like one of the best looking books out there, and I believe it's Lee Romero. Romero, I know
yeah,
the
yeah,
last
yeah,
name's Romero. Yeah, it's one of the best looking books out there, and I completely
yeah.
feel you on as far as like the big two and kind of going in cycles and popping in and out. I just feel like indie comics and I'm talking like even more indie than Image, like seeing what is coming out of Boom Studios and IDW and Scout Comics and all of that. It feels like we are in a different. I don't know. Maybe this is like maybe aiming a little too high. This might be a lot of hyperbole, but I feel like we're in another renaissance in terms of like indie publishers just kind of like just sprouting, and then also getting really talented creators, whether that be big names that are coming from the big two and Image, or and then
Yeah.
ones that you've never heard of. I just feel like comic books is just you hear comic books is dying, this and that. It's like I don't think you guys are looking in the right places or
Yeah.
reading them like you should, because the indie stuff has been smashing.
Well, I think the superheroes it's an interesting time for them because they've never had to figure out what their deal is like they're having to right now because we're sort of at the end
Man,
of 20
well
years
said.
of superheroes being the entire pop culture, right? Like Marvel Cinematic Universe,
Hmm.
Zack Snyder DC, whatever, like everything people were getting psyched about in the whole pop culture was superheroes. And comics up until then had just been where you go to get superheroes. And now people go to
Damn.
Spider-Verse to get their Miles Morales, or they wait
Hmm.
for the PlayStation game to get their Spider-Man, So
Yeah.
comics are really figuring out what they are if they're superhero comics, like what it is that makes them special.
Yeah.
And I think it's taken a little while for them to figure that out. But on the other
Yeah.
hand, the creator owned comics, the kind of stuff that I do, I agree. Like I think it's an incredibly fertile time. I think, there hasn't been this much like diversity of comics where it's just like
Exactly.
not just crime comics and not just like
Hmm.
off-brand superhero comics or whatever. Like it's like there's fucking Beneath the Trees Where Nobody Sees, and
Dude,
there's
come on. Eh,
Black
There's
Cloak.
no genre that isn't being represented in comics and represented really well.
Yeah, for
Like
sure.
whether it be superheroes. The other day I convinced someone. Big shout out to Nihal. I'm mispronouncing your name, but I'm talking to you, buddy. I convinced him to pick up Minor Threats. I was like, yo,
Hmm.
this is an indie superhero comic universe, which I love. I still love superheroes. I just haven't had the itch to go pick up Marvel DC. So when I see like something like Minor Threats where they're building out this superhero
Yeah,
world, kind of a la Astro City, like I'm here for it. And it's not just the superhero stuff that's killing it in the indies, but like horror. Like I if you would have told me, I don't know, fucking 5, 10 years ago that I'd be collecting this much like horror and horror adjacent comic books, I'd be like, nah, like, this
yeah,
Marvel is my bread and butter, but
yeah.
it's an embarrassment of riches in terms of like you said, the diversity and quality of comic books out there from publishers that, are sprouting up that seems like every day. But yeah, I totally agree with what you're saying.
I feel like you're just looking for something, or at least I am. I'm just looking for something to make me feel something, and horror
Yes.
is like a shortcut to that, right? Like
Hmm.
if you're good at it, if you do that right, you can make somebody feel something every issue. They feel scared, they feel uncomfortable, they feel whatever, but whatever they feel, they'll remember it,
Yeah.
so then the next time you go pick up like The Deviant or Beneath the Trees or
Hmm.
Feral, whatever, you go like, oh, I remember what happened last time. That was fucked. And like the way that made me feel or whatever. But
Exactly.
I
Yeah.
gotta I gotta check back in and see what's happening now.
Yeah, so I guess that might be my new rating system on a scale of one to, yeah, we're fucked.
Yeah, that was
How good
fucked.
is it? Yeah, that was fucked.
Yeah.
All right, Tony, I've got one last question. I want to end on a bang here. It's kind of 180. It kind of puts you on the spot, but considering that you are a writer and artist extraordinaire, I'm curious to hear who is on your comic book route, Mount Rushmore. And typically, I ask folks if it's a writer, I'll ask for their top five, or not top five, but Mount Rushmore is four. Feel free to do a fifth, but I'll ask for a writer's, Mount Rushmore, artists are Mount Rushmore. But in your case, I'll let you kind of do an amalgam if you want. Who is on your comic book Mount Rushmore? And if you want to add a fifth spot, you're more than welcome to.
All right. Well, this we don't have to actually carve this into stone, so I'm gonna just go
There we
off the
go.
top of my head.
Yeah, it's how you feeling today. I mean, I think that's the caveat. This could change tomorrow or the next time I ask you.
As far as like who influenced me, like where I feel myself like aspiring to
Hmm.
be a creator like they were creators. Uh, Brian Michael Bendis was huge for me. Um, and especially when we talk about like making people feel something,
Yeah.
like he was great at moments. I'm always thinking about what are the moments.
Hmm.
Um, and I feel like people sort of get lost in the sauce when they think about like his like dialogue and like pitter patter and discussion and stuff like that, and you forget about those big holy shit moments, like you know Secret Invasion or whatever, when Norman Osborn kills the Queen Scroll, and he was like, oh no, like he was good at that type of stuff. Um, David Lapham, Stray
Hmm.
Bullets
Yeah.
is probably one of my top two or three comics of all time. Um, and again, that book makes you real like that's the only comic that ever made me cry. Like
Damn.
it's just like a crime comic about dirtbags and idiots, but also it's about like they're so vulnerable and so like they're never safe, and so you're always just like, oh God, what's going to happen to them? And I feel like that like he's a master of doing that. Um, J. Scott Campbell. I
Wow.
don't.
Okay.
I never saw anybody draw better than him, and that
Huh.
definitely comes from being like a teenager in 1995 when Gen 13 and Danger Girl come out.
Yeah. Yeah.
You know? But that's the coolest artwork. Like him, everybody that was on Cliffhanger, him, Joe Mad, Humberto Ramos,
Mm,
Chris Marcello. Like if I'll read anything those guys do,
for
um,
sure.
but
No,
we'll
that.
use J. Scott Campbell as the avatar of that type of thing, you know. So I don't have to give all the heads to the just the people from Cliffhanger Comics.
Yeah.
Um, Similarly to that, Rob Liefeld, I feel like that sort of energy, that sort of power, like there's so much of his stuff in Local Man and just sort of um in the again moments and creativity, like when we're coming up with ideas for stuff and we're just like when I feel like I'm being my most creative and potent, I'm thinking like, well, Rob Liefeld would have been doing twice as much of this, you know,
Hmm.
before Breakfast. Like he was just a very fertile, creative mind, especially in those days, like in those like Youngblood, X Force, you know, like he was going crazy in those days. That's four, right?
Yeah.
One, two, three, four, and five. Uh, Brian K. Vaughan for sure.
No.
The way that he does cliffhanger, like he's great at cliffhangers, and every page can be a cliffhanger, and
Yep.
moments and characters. And I think Kirkman does a similar version of it too, where he's just very good at like he understands what um, ways to close out a comic, ways to close out a scene, you know. And I think that's the sort of thing like when you're in it and when you're making comics, and even when you're just reading them, you really appreciate that you're reading something, and when you close one and you go, wow, you know. And I several times would read Brian K. Vaughan comics and just close the cover and just be like, God damn, there it was. That's something. All those guys,
Shit.
like that's sort of my generation is those guys like Bendis, Brian K. Vaughan, Ed Brubaker. Like that's like those were the ones that were most influential when I was,
Yeah,
kid.
dude, that is a solid list, and I enjoy asking that question, not just to catch my guests off guard, but it varies from creator to creator, and I got to say that might be one of the most unique ones. You had a lot of names that I personally would probably put on a list. I'm glad that you gave Brian Michael Bendis a lot of love because I feel like it's cool to joke on him and quote unquote hate on him today. I see that a lot among like comic Twitter and Reddit
Yeah,
and things, but it's like, yo, let's be real. When Brian Michael Bendis was like in his heyday, in his absolute prime, not saying that what he's
yeah.
doing now isn't good. Like, yo, he it like,
He did a
yo,
brand new thing, did something completely
exactly,
different, and and changed the way everybody would do things. Yeah,
yeah.
he was hugely influential on me. But yeah,
Agreed. Agreed. And now you got me thinking about all the times I used to sneak my dad's Danger Girl comics as a teenager in high school. Like, yo, you're right. That art is burned in my memory. J. Scott Campbell is insanely talented.
yeah.
Um, man, Tony, this has been a fantastic conversation. I really thought this was going to be an hour, but lo and behold, I
Oh,
enjoyed every
exciting.
single minute of it. Ladies and gents, this is the Short Box Podcast, and we just finished talking with Tony Fleecs about all of the comics he's currently working on, like Feral, Local Man, Army of Darkness Forever, and Uncanny Valley, which are all available right now and releasing every month at your local comic shops and wherever else comics are sold. Please do yourselves a favor, add these books to your pull list, grab the trades when they come out, and follow Tony on X and Instagram to stay up to date with what he's got going on. I'm gonna have a couple of links in the show notes if you want to give Tony a follow and see what he's got going on. Check out the show notes for that. But Tony, like I said, this has been a fantastic conversation. Do you have anything else that you want to share that we didn't get to? Any parting words or any upcoming projects you want people to know?
I'm doing Super Pets with Mike Norton. It's a one shot at DC. That's I think in solicits now, but otherwise you covered all the important stuff. Uncanny Valley, Local Man, Feral, Army of Darkness Forever every month. Yeah, that's all you need to know. Thanks for having me on. Thanks for reading my books. I appreciate it.
Oh yeah, no, my pleasure, man. And I hope to have you on again. I will be, yeah, obviously I'm following 3 or 4 of these books. I might just go ahead and make it a fourth one. But I've got some awesome homework because I think I'm gonna go to check out In My Lifetime while listening to In My Lifetime.
Good.
And I'm probably going to check out Stray Bullets because you really won me over with your description about that.
Issue 8 is the one that made me cry. So
Ooh.
let me know. Your mileage may
Easy.
vary.
Done deal. Hell yeah.